I am actually in a room with a subset of the overall team, and we're going to jump right into just sort of the presentation, but I wanted to make sure to emphasize this is a subset of the team that's present, and the names are here. We're not going to go through introductions at this point, but you'll hear our voices. We'll introduce our roles as we go, and then we'll definitely do more introductions as we go through the journeys here together. Additionally, definitely want to extend thanks to the team members that are not joining us. It is, again, broader than the names here, and by all means to the executive team that helped foster this transformation journey, John Bartley, Gary Watkins, and Josh Greig. Additionally, want to emphasize the artwork that we'll be seeing is actually by Brad Barton, and that will come through as we go through the presentation. So to sort of kick us off, I want to just sort of put out the key question that I commonly get relative to this experience. And that question is, what makes this unique? What makes AutoVIN and this particular journey unique? And the best way to sort of just get us started is I want people to really recognize, one, is that every journey is unique. And this story is their story. Their being the team that you're going to hear from and the folks that are outside this room. Additionally, as you think about that story, also really consider that what they have done, and what makes this, again, very, very powerful, is the ability to integrate both what we would call the letter of Agile as well as the spirit of agility. And you'll see that come through as they express themselves as we move forward. With very little more to say beyond that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Jeremy to kick us off.
Hello, my name's Jeremy Dibble. I'm the product manager in charge of the new inspection platform that AutoVIN is creating. We're a subsidiary of ADESA. We provide inspections for them for the vehicles they sell at the auction. So that's the primary focus of what we're doing right now with the new product. Beyond that, we provide audits for financial institutions, general audits of other facilities as well, end-of-lease inspections for the rest of the industry, and part of that we want to make sure we're providing accurate information to our consumers.
Excellent. Anything else, team? Very, very nice. Very nice. So now we'll get into a little bit of sort of why we took on this journey and really hearing it from your voices. Freddie.
This is Freddie speaking. I'm a member of the QA group. We were an Agile shop in principle, but not necessarily in practice. That is, we user stories, we used time boxing, we had stand-up meetings, but we found that our stories were often vague and could not be completed in the allocated time box. Initially, our daily meetings were actually run by management instead of being run by team members, and that caused team members to be reluctant to take ownership. Additionally, it was difficult for us to gauge our status because of these problems and some other problems as well. So because we couldn't gauge our own status, it was difficult for us to provide status to our management team. So we obviously needed to make some additional transformations to really more accurately use the Agile process.
This is Kirsten. I'm the business analyst, and our situation was a little interesting and challenging because we, on this project, were given the opportunity to go through this Agile transformation. However, the rest of AutoVIN was staying in that kind of a hybrid Agile fall, if you will, Agile waterfall hybrid. And then also the parent company, ADESA, did not operate it in Agile methodology. So we had to learn to interact with other teams that were not following our process and didn't have our sense of urgency, if you will, about certain things. The keepers of our hardware were, the ADESA. And so we had to learn pretty quickly to work with them.
Excellent. Anything to add, Johnathan?
Looking at why the capitalization of a solid vehicle information inspection and reporting platform when we started this particular project, at least when I got on this project, which was referred to as Nexus, it had been around for at least a year, and our team had been moving to developing a new generation inspection and condition reporting system. Some things in the economy had changed, and a few decisions were made. One major decision that was made was we were going to move to DESA and put our efforts into bringing that particular client on board first. Another major decision that occurred early or late 2011 was they decided to close our office. So that added a little nuance into this transformation, knowing that physically this facility was going to be moving to Carmel, Indiana. In addition to relocating, we needed to now integrate, as Kirsten had mentioned, working with a non-Agile organization. So we had to integrate AutoVIN, and particularly this project, into the DESA world.
Very, very well said. One of the key triggers to the transformation journey, of course, is John Bartlett's involvement. And what was really, really powerful in the conversation with John is he started a conversation with myself, and he said, I really want to approach this with what's possible. And I said, John, let's explore what do you really mean by that? And he essentially came back with, we've got a fantastic team, we've got a fantastic organization. How do we help them maximize what's already been happening? Additionally, how do we really allow them to capitalize on the unique place that they are in relationship to the broader family of ADESA, and likewise, ADESA capitalize on that team member, and most definitely integrate the worlds. So all of that coming together, the key thing that I put forward with John at that point is I said, John, when we think about agility, we really think about it as a value system. So it's not simply exactly as Freddie said, it's not simply doing user stories or using cards, but rather it's fundamentally about how do people come together, how do those people essentially focus on results that we're trying to produce. Additionally, how they collaborate, if you will, and become responsive to the marketplace. So in saying all of that, it is very, very critical to recognize when I started working with the team here, the energy was here. That was the first thing I detected. And the energy was here. The next question becomes, okay, how is that energy now really activated even further? And what I picked up on are two things. One is it felt like that energy was somewhat constrained, meaning that the folks weren't shining as brightly as they could, if you will. And then additionally, that energy was, if you will, under-tapped. So how do you activate that energy, unleash that energy? That's very much the backdrop that started all of this, as the team has shared. There we go. So as we continue the conversation, the question becomes, well, how do we now approach this transformation? And the key thing that we started really going after in the conversation is the team is doing a lot of good stuff, the organization is doing a lot of good stuff, but the fundamental premise of going to an Agile approach is the orchestration around value. So I open it up with really two questions with John amongst other team members at this point, is how is the organization discovering value, and how is the organization delivering on value? And when you dig a little bit deeper, and this essentially captures the journey that the folks here will share their experiences around, is when we talk about discovery, what we're really interested in is some fundamental questions. What's the vision for what we want to accomplish? If you will, what's the overall roadmap and high-level plan for getting there? And additionally, what's the justification? And I notice I don't say business case, because it's also a business case as much as a human case, if you will, in everything that we do. So what's the justification for what we're doing? And then really thinking about that value from a customer's perspective and the viability and the vitality in the organization. I can very openly say, if the vitality doesn't exist, the energy, then don't try the transformation, because the patient's already passed, with all due respect. But going into discovery, we went ahead, if you will, and then said, let's really hone in on these activities. We went through a few time boxes, and from those time boxes, these are some of the experiences and the recommendations that are coming from the AutoVIN team. Yeah,
so this is Jeremy. As we started discovery, there's a lot of challenges that existed there. We were taking on a new process, and some of that methodology is a little bit different to us. As Freddie kind of mentioned before, we had these, large chunks of functionality that were very difficult to time box and complete. And so we really needed to find a way to make the work smaller. And so we really had to dig into the business problem and figure out how to split that apart and, slice it thinly. So something that we could finish, in a couple weeks and make sure we're really done with it in that time period. As part of that, we really, had a lot of appreciation for the complexity of the technology solution. So, there's a lot of architecting that goes on and a lot of preparation that needed to happen, but we had to figure out how to do that in a timely manner. So in this case, spreading out the architecture over several iterations. And of course, as part of any of that, we have to make sure that the business is aligned as how we're delivering this. So, we're not going to deliver the end solution in the entire piece. We're going to deliver little sections at a time, but at least they can see and get feedback, and at least we're aligned as an organization. They know what's going on, whereas before, we'd spend a year and we couldn't really show them a whole lot until the very end. So we weren't really sure if we were delivering exactly what they needed.
And one thing that we kind of struggled with, I think, at the beginning was this idea that we had to know everything up front. And with Agile, it kind of liberates you from that because you're not expected to know everything up front. There's a whole lot of figure it out, not really figure it out as you go, but you do as much research as is necessary to get the story moving. And I think that was a little difficult for us to really grasp onto it first and took some time for us.
I think that was a big struggle. This is Sherry from I think that was a big struggle for us, the mindset of, like you mentioned, do we have to know everything? And I think it was emphasized, take what you know today, what you have learned in the past, what you know today, and move forward because you will never know everything. Things will come to light as time goes on.
Exactly.
This is Mark Noyce. I'd say with the change from the emphasis on internal product line to adopting auctions, that the key there was that suddenly we were dealing with things that were outside of our domain of control as well as expertise. We weren't sure how much control we would have in terms of integrating with this external partner, the auction management system. This was the folks that were less agile than even we were. And so while we did have executive sponsorship guaranteed to us by John Bartley and Gary Watkins, the new folks on the AMS team were still new to those concepts and certainly new to the Agile. So from our perspective, or at least from mine, there was a lot of hesitance to this point, not being afraid to move beyond discovery, to be willing to say, yes, I can commit to that when these things are literally outside of my ability to change and influence.
And very well said. Actually, Jake, one comment I think that is extremely crucial is tying, forgive me for interrupting you, Harish, tying the notion of liberation with being afraid. I would say for anyone, and team, please kind of, see what your thoughts are around this. If you're doing an agile approach, you're trying to adopt agility, and you're not afraid in some capacity, then you're not moving toward a greater degree of liberation. But you should be afraid to some degree.
Yes, Johnathan, the Scrum Master, and when we first started, a lot of people were hesitant with this particular process. As a new person, I had some trepidation on what should I be doing. I'm a project manager by trade and have been doing that for years, but coming into this role, it was a little different, and the team had to embrace it and grow from that.
Getting into one of the things that we discovered in discovery phase was to understand the technical complexity of the solution. The technology solution that we came up with for the business problem contained multiple layers that included Windows-based application that run on handheld devices, and then we had a middle layer application based on .NET and Web Portal, as well as some other applications developed in .NET. And then we had a WebSphere-based integration layer that used to communicate with all the external parties. During the discovery phase, we realized that we cannot develop all the fundamental components needed upfront. We needed to deliver the value, business value, and simultaneously develop frameworks or fundamental plumbing technical components that were required. So it was challenging to identify those components and prioritize them first so that we can show the business some business values at the beginning, upfront in the beginning of the project. And we did able to slice them thinly, all those technical components, and integrate it into our business delivery.
Yeah, this is Julius from development. If we just talk about thin slicing, I guess that was really a problem for us to be able to take all these stories and slice them thinly, and to be able also to show the business that there is value in it. So say, for example, a specific example would be, say, you collect all this data and you are going to show a report of this data. But if you want to wait until you can show all the data on your report, you'll never be able to do it in a 2-week time frame. So one way we're able to solve that is, say, just take the basic information you'll need, just the ID of your report and maybe one data, say the VIN of a vehicle, and make that go through the whole system and be able to show it on the report. With that, you're able to show some value and thin slice the story as well as go through the whole system.
So talking about the thin slicing, adding to what Julius said, how we approach was to take data domains and use implement the same data domain across multiple layers. That included external systems, as Mark mentioned, auction management system, then our middle tier, then our handheld devices. So for one iteration, we used one or multiple data domains and implemented functionality for those data domains across all the layers.
And Mark here, often that was a challenge just for the fact that we did have external consumers of these services, and a lot of times in our particular environment we have development dev-ins or development integration, QA environments, and the systems, the external consumers weren't able to integrate with the mid-tier until we were able to propagate any code changes to dev-in. So a lot of times being able to make those changes, let's say in the database, the mid-tier, propagate them to dev-in, and then allow the external consumers to start integrating and developing against that, we were often challenged with the 2-week sprint, and there were several times that we talked about the possibility of even increasing that.
And also to speak to that challenge, we didn't meet the time box every time. There were some stories, especially geared around the changing from the lease end towards the auto or the inspection at the auction site. A lot of those stories took a bit longer, maybe a couple of sprints, and certainly we had our challenges about not sticking to our time boxes and all of the interesting conflicts that brought out.
Absolutely. And, it says don't be afraid to move beyond discovery. I think another thing is don't be afraid to commit to something, even though you may be hesitant to think that you could possibly complete it within that 2-week sprint, given the challenges noted. Go ahead and commit to it. But at the same token, I think one thing that we did struggle with at times was making sure that whenever you don't meet the commitment within that 2-week sprint, that that's handled in a positive fashion. If it's not, I think you can absolutely create future hesitance to commit.
Yeah, those are some really, really delicate points. For the folks online joining us, notice how in the conversation, if you will, it's very critical to think about deliberation as an element of dealing with fear, to build confidence, and to go through those struggles. The technical elements that the team has just mentioned, and again, team, please chime in, are crucial in better understanding the problem space, the solution space, as well as making sure that we can confront even greater challenges.
Also, there were times when we thought that we had the stories to an acceptable level, and once we got into them, we discovered that we really needed to break them down even more to be able to complete them in the time box that we wanted to complete them.
Yep, very much. Very well said.
So it's an evolution.
Yeah. It'll be perfect the first go around. Sometimes you have to come back and look at it and say, okay, wait a minute, we have this, we understood this, but yet we have certain parts of it we didn't, so we're going to have to actually maybe create another user story or story and put that in the next round. So.
And I would go so far as to say it's never perfect.
Right.
But it gets better.
Yes.
Because you learn from what you're doing. And
absolutely, you learn on these things.
And through that discovery and minimalization of the features, there's less potential waste. That's huge.
I think every sprint was a springboard to the next sprint. That's what stands out in my mind from the way we handled everything. Everything was a springboard to the next one. We learned a great deal, took what we learned and applied it to the next sprint, and we kept getting better and better and better. So the velocity actually improved.
Very well said.
And Johnathan, again, one good thing was the way we organized our team. We had swarmed smaller teams, engineering teams, where we had an analyst, development, and QA all working together. We did specialize that in functional areas of the application so that we could focus. And then by doing that, people had the confidence going in because that was the area that they were comfortable with and were able to deliver faster.
Very good point. Additionally, just calling out some really critical things that from a coaching perspective, just observing, before we got started, there was a real communication vehicle through tickets and through sort of mechanisms, if you will, that allowed us to operate together. Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
But kudos to you all, very openly. Kudos to you all. You were able to flip the switch from stopping using those defects and tickets and what have you in a matter of a single sprint. We just said we're going to start today, and we're not going to use them. We're going to start swarming. We're going to start collaborating more. We're going to overcome with all due respect, the crutches that we lean on historically. So kudos to you. That takes a lot of courage to be able to do that in a flip of a switch. Anything else on discovery team, Tad?
And the other part takes down that is, letting the tool drive your process and kind of scary. And I know we made huge steps when we just went all the way back to stickies. I mean, it's just something as simple as that, making things visible, improving that physical interaction between us all. So we went through our daily stand-ups. That was a huge part of it. We're not isolated through email or, project management tools and whatnot.
But during the discovery time frame, we did try to time box most of our meetings. I won't say they all went well, but most of them did.
Which is, Fine has mentioned several times, that's natural. Remember, he also said this is going to be natural. We try to, as hard as we could, but sometimes.
There's a few stand-ups that lasted longer than 15 minutes.
There you go. Very well said.
I would like to also add that this is Rick, from a QA perspective, in getting rid of those defects, it also allowed us to continue to have ownership of that product rather than I've done my job, I've entered my defects, now I just have to wait. By doing the collaboration, we still felt ownership and responsible for helping to get that product to move forward, and we became an asset to moving the product forward rather than just a dead weight after we, done our ticket and left. So.
Vero, I have to quote Gary Hamel. Gary Hamel says one of the challenges with organizations nowadays is they're not human anymore. They're dehumanized. So a lot of what we're describing really is just reconnecting with our own humanity, if you will. To be able to talk with Johnathan, right, face-to-face versus over the phone is a very, very different experience. Sometimes pleasant, sometimes less so. From your perspective and how I get it, so I'll put it that way. Anything else on discovery? Good. The one thing I would encourage the folks kind of listening to this, there's a few key tidbits that, specifically from a coaching perspective, that gravitate and grab us, if you will, as coaches. And the key things that really stand out, if you will, discovery is very much about the business and technology world coming together. It's about aligning and appreciating. There's a deep sense of appreciation that occurs both within the team and across the organization. If you can't appreciate, then we're kind of lost, quite openly. Additionally, being aware. That's where the fear comes in. If you're not afraid, it just means you're not aware enough, quite honestly. I fear going to my favorite coffee place and them serving me the wrong coffee. Let's put it that way. So it's an element of being aware. And additionally, really gaining the confidence, if you will, exactly as you're describing, to struggle together. That's a crucial aspect. And definitely the AutoVIN team at large and the ADESA team taking that whole is very powerful. Good. So let's take a look at, if you will, the next piece of this, which was delivery. So we did a collection of time boxes. We were faithful to the time boxes during discovery, exactly as Johnathan indicated. Not all the events were time boxed, but definitely the time boxes themselves we were faithful to. And again, team, please don't hesitate to chime in. Going into delivery, we focused on multiple delivery cycles, and the objective at this point was to build enough confidence to be able to drop down into delivery. And once we dropped down into delivery, our objective at this point was essentially to really begin to deliver value that we had discovered and were operating against. So as you kind of look at the diagrams and the interlocking notion here, we definitely have a preparation period, commonly called a sprint zero. We have an execution period, commonly called work sprints or work iterations, where we're operating in time box rhythms. And most definitely, we have an implementation period, a hardening or a release sprint. The reason we have those is because they give the, if you will, the sprint zero and the hardening sprint is to give stability to that whole release. We can definitely evolve into a cycle where those are no longer necessary, but definitely that was the intent, if you will, from a coaching perspective. Additionally, within the operation of a particular sprint, we have a particular triangle, sometimes we refer to it as the core triangle, where we're beginning to define what needs to be done in greater detail. We're beginning to co-create it from a development perspective and a database perspective and a coding perspective and all those perspectives. And then we're beginning to confirm it from a testing perspective. So the swarms, as folks online here have heard already, were crucial and organized around that fundamental construct. And with that, I'm going to kind of really ask the team to share some of their experiences and thoughts around the delivery experience.
This is Rick. I'll just jump in a bit. We also found that the transformation wasn't at all limited to our team. There was also a transformation in the manager side. As they, prior to this transformation, they would look at our tool and look for percent completes to change in the QA status. And as we moved away from that, they had to look for new things to monitor our status. And then we began looking at story burn down rates and story completion, and that captured more of a dev and QA and the entire team, the status of the entire team, rather than just the one group of people at the end, with the quality. And you could see them struggling a bit with how to get the information I need about how my product is going forward and growing, and how we're doing as a team, and to begin to look at the metrics that come from the Agile process. And also you could see them come into our room with our information ready, our stickies, and look and just wonder what this is all about. And you can kind of see the wonder on their face of, how do I make heads or tails of this? So it definitely was a transformation for them as well as for the team.
Good. So very holistic, and just because one person is involved in the equation doesn't mean that other parties aren't implicitly, if not equally, involved.
Right. Agile's not just software development; it's the whole culture shift.
Very well said. Very well said. We always use the notion of, is the dog wagging the tail or is the tail wagging the dog? Or are they both wagging each other?
And as Scrum Master, I got it from management a lot, on a good public side. But the question of how do we measure our success? Me just saying we're doing good is not good enough for them. So we had to come up with our metrics, and our team initially did not support story points, but we then, after a couple of iterations, did go into using story points, and then we could start to see, now we can start gaining and judging our velocity and understanding what velocity is. It's not about are we done yet, but it's about how much work can we get done in a particular iteration or release.
And management was very patient with us.
Yes.
Around points especially. So kudos to all.
And also, this is Julius. You can say Agile is also about collaboration. And I mean, you have to be able to collaborate between the development team, the QA team, and the business. And it is hard work, of course, but it is a worthwhile endeavor. And it is through that collaboration, actually, that we're able to stop doing defect tracking. That is, as soon as issues are found, you can, between these teams, resolve that issue. That way there is no rework. When the sprint is over, you're sure that the story is done, and it is done, not development done.
Really done.
Really done.
If we extend that out, I mean, really reaching out to some of the users from the business side and making sure they really approve of where we're going with it, seeing those thin slices like that was really powerful for them. So it was more just inside our team and went outside as well, reaching out to those users, reaching out to management, they get to see the progress, through the accelerated velocity, maybe the timelines aren't the end game, but they're seeing how much more they're getting in there, and there's a lot more trust because of that, because we're going to deliver a lot more.
And it was showing them as we went along, not necessarily waiting until the very end to show everything to them. So as the story was completed, here it is.
Yeah, it's not the Christmas present I wanted.
So effectively, sprint by sprint, we're demonstrating to the product manager, but even on release by release, we're even demonstrating to the end customer and the executive sponsorship team.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of trust that we gain doing it that way. I mean, at least for me, I trust everybody in the team more than I've ever trusted them before. Through seeing everything working and everybody taking ownership, and it makes my life so much easier.
Very well said. Not only building trust from the team to the context or the management and the organization, but it's building trust within the team as well. That's a huge, I know I could lean on Mark, for example, and Mark can lean on me very, very openly. Versus day one, I didn't know who Mark was as a team member. How about thinking about sort of remote team members, and what are your thoughts there, folks?
Yeah, we had some testers who were located in the Carmel office, and we that was another interesting challenge, was remembering that whenever we would have conversations just off the cuff in the middle of the office, we got to get so-and-so on the phone. But then also the management team realized that would be an issue, and so they made it possible that those team members could fly in and be actually, here physically, and that helped a lot.
Go ahead, Johnathan.
But I know at the beginning I was kind of hesitant as the Scrum Master to having remote team members, and had to grow into that. That was one of the things that, everybody needs to be here physically. That's the way Agile works, Scrum Agile works, everybody's here. And then we started to evolve, and when we needed additional resources, you had to do what you needed to do to make the project successful, and having these remote people make our project successful.
So just for clarity's sake, as a coach, if you will, did I ever say that everybody needs to be here?
No.
No.
So I want to make sure, especially very clear for folks online, we read a lot of the literature, right, that says you got to have co-located teams.
Yeah.
Not at all. You can definitely work with it, and exactly as Johnathan is saying, the team is saying, adapt. That's the beauty of it.
Good. And talking about the distributed team, that's, some of our, when it came to interfacing with external systems, some of the teams were still less agile or water agile, whatever you would like to call it. And we needed to bring them on board with what we needed to coordinate with them. For example, if we needed, to give an example for system analysis, we were moving at a much quicker pace than the rest of some of the organization teams that we were following traditional methodology. Our ETAs would be like one hour in hours or a day, but they were more accustomed to have a longer analysis time. And then for another example, for development, when we're interfacing with coming up with the external system contracts, those some contracts would not be ready for us for weeks, and we had to come up with some innovative methods so that we can finish our side of the work. And then when the less agile teams are ready, we will create new user stories for them to interface with them. So those kind of some of the innovative or different solutions we had to adapt to different teams to match their schedule also.
And that's also where the grooming really came into play. Is that at first we were kind of behind the curve a little bit. We were playing catch up for a while, but once we were able to catch up with the grooming, we were able to groom ahead and get some things to the less agile teams in advance so that they had the time that they needed.
And also talking in adding to what Kirsten said, sorry. Forward grooming is, from my perspective, was one of the challenging aspects because, we, as a delivery team member, I would have a delivery every other day, once in 3 days. So to accommodate the grooming of the next iteration or the future iteration, it required a lot more discipline. And we were not always successful in that. But one thing I do observe that for the iterations for which we were doing forward grooming successfully, those were the iterations where we got most of the story points covered compared to where we were not able to do the forward grooming.
One other key point, when we initially started, we had, developers and testers that was basically specializing in certain areas. As we went further and further, we found a lot of cross-training going on. People were accepting, ownership of other areas other than the ones with which they were most familiar. That happened in development and testing. And because of that cross-training, we were able to load balance because each iteration was different. One would be heavy in one area, the next one might be heavy in another area. But by getting the team cross-trained in all different areas, it allowed us to more effectively use our resources for each sprint.
Very well said. Just for the sake of time, are we just kind of going into the conclusion a little bit just so we can get to the Q&A? Okay. The one thing, just to close out this slide, I hope the folks online definitely have really heard sort of how the clarity around value through discovery, move distance delivery, how the collaboration increased the confidence, if you will, and the trust, and that's where we struggle through it to accomplish that. Being extremely considerate of other members, remote or otherwise, and likewise really balancing all those things through grooming and the plumbing that has to be done is very, very crucial for a team. Kind of looking into sort of the conclusions, some of the overarching recommendations, folks, please share your thoughts.
It's definitely a journey. You have to be open to grow. I saw us change from day one to today. One instance of that change was around the storyboard. We had a physical storyboard on multiple walls in a conference room, and with lots of Post-its and stickies up. And the team, because we were remote, it didn't work for us. So the team, doing a retrospective, brought it up. Hey, let's use a virtual tool. And we went to that virtual tool to try and make it easier for all team members.
Yeah, so another thing was, at least for me, this is Jeremy, was that I mentioned a lot about trust before. It was something where I had to let go of some of those details I usually involved myself in before and really letting the teams work things out together. So through that additional collaboration they're really able to get down and solve the problem. So, it wasn't something where I had to be involved in the solution as much. So that was huge for me, and I think it was huge for the team.
Mark, this idea of being prepared to question everything has several facets to it. I mean, certainly, as you all know, if one person's willing to speak up, half the team probably had the same concern. So, we had our retrospectives after each sprint. We got to the point where sometimes we would even question some of those patterns and say, why not do it on a daily basis? Do it at the end of each stand-up instead of waiting for several weeks till the end of the sprint to discuss ongoing improvements. Go ahead and address them as they come up and making immediate corrections.
That's an excellent example, Mark, that a lot of people could take away. And you folks really naturally moved into that mode, right? It's not a 2-hour retrospective after every stand-up, but rather it's some time allocation to address that. So kudos to the team for...
Just felt much more natural instead of being forced at the end of a sprint to say, okay, what do we need to improve? You do it as needed. If there's nothing, fantastic.
Yeah, and I think the key point is if it doesn't feel natural, then it's okay to question the coach. I think that's very, very, this team and you folks know me well, and I know you reasonably well. We, especially Mark, you and I, we always talk about interesting subjects. And a lot of times people perceive it as you and I going at each other talking about it, what we're doing, but it's always about a particular subject. And then we head over and grab a good cup of coffee together.
Never personal.
Exactly. But that's kudos to the team for doing that. Questioning everything. How about, if you will, be prepared to change and for more change than you bargained for?
Well, businesses are influenced by economic conditions, and we've previously talked about the fact that we changed from lease-in to auctions along the way because there was a change in the economy which precipitated that. We also discussed the fact that we had distributed location and using different technologies, and we had to work within that realm. Distributed technology, different technologies. But sitting above all of that is culture. We had a small, agile company here that was quick to move and change, and we had a much larger company that was used more of a waterfall process, and that caused some clashes at times. But we managed to work through all of that.
Well said, Freddie. Talking about the culture, this was my first Agile project. This is my first Agile project. So when I started this journey, I thought this is just another way of developing software. But now I think this is much more than that, just another way of developing software. The changes that this starts can propagate to multiple layers, be it management, be it development team, at many levels. As you have heard previously, management has to let the control go. The development team has to take more ownership of everything. Also, Mark just mentioned that the feedback mechanism is very, very important, be it every day, be it at the end of the iteration. The fact that the development team members or the QA members were able to openly, give the feedback in a constructive and positive way, that I believe empowered a lot of people and helped them to assume more responsibility and accomplish, carry out their responsibilities in a very empowered way. I have changed my view of this whole thing in the last few months.
Very nice. The thing that emanates from kind of the journey as we unfold, and I'm actually going to quote my colleague Mark Ferraro, who's always talking about transformation as a form of renewal, if you will, and he's blogged on that subject likewise. But it is very much a journey, right, where you do go through a struggle naturally, and there's a natural sense of being afraid. And a lot of times as coaches, we're just here to say it's okay, right, to be afraid. It's very natural. But you ultimately get to a point of taking ownership, both on the business side and the technology side, by really shifting that DNA and culture. And to that, you have to question everything. And quite openly, if we were the only ones that have gone through a transformation as a team, then nothing would have changed. Management has gone through as much of a transformation as each individual in this particular team.
Maybe more.
Very good. Exactly. And kudos to the folks that brought us all together, that had that view. How about having fun?
It's always fun.
Every day is fun.
I definitely found this is Rick, QA perspective, I definitely found this to be a fun, empowering way to work, rather than here's the things you have to do and here's the time you have to do it. It was, and march till you're dead. It was much more of a matter of the team getting together and deciding what can we do, how can we do it, how should we do it. A lot of ownership, a lot of just empowering to do the best job rather than being forced to do this other job that really doesn't bring the value, but the people who made that decision didn't know. Also, the premise of teamwork, everyone knows that 2 heads, 4 heads are better than 1, but you bring that concept to everything you do. Sprint planning, developing stories, design, that concept is just brought so deeply into the entire process, and you get the benefit of that in everything that you do. I would like to say that this is probably not for the faint of heart, kind of hearkening back to the question everything idea, and it's not particularly suited for those individuals who like to work a solitary, go off by themselves, do a task, and give it back in 2 weeks. It's probably not particularly suited for those people, but myself, and obviously, from the voices you hear, found it to be an interesting and empowering and fun way to work.
I think one of the key things is don't separate fun from pain, right? You struggled. Even through the struggle, there were ups and downs.
Yeah, we have to struggle for the reward. I mean, we're moving faster, and we get to see the results of it too. Which it was really hard for us to see the results before, and it took forever. So we kind of forgot what it felt like. And so we get to see it quite often now, and that's huge for me. I know a lot of people, they get to see what they've worked on. They get to get feedback from the users and say, yeah, you did a great job. This is really spot on. And for me, that's really part of the fun. I mean, getting something out of it, and there's going to be struggles, but it has to be worth fighting for, and that's worth fighting for when we get those rewards in that.
And kind of going back to the liberating concept, software development is a very creative process. And if you're constantly being told this is what you're going to do and this is how long you have to do it, it stifles that creativity. And so going into these more empowered team decisions, everyone's talking about what's going to happen, and it just gets the creativity going, and I think that makes for a more enjoyable workplace.
And through that, we found that the functionality that we collaborated most on was probably the most successful as well, because we had a lot more people involved, we had more input from different angles, and so it was more complete.
Very well said. Just to wrap up and move into the QA piece, if you will, I've been coming down here to Atlanta for some time now. We've been spending time together, and it's wavered off. And a lot of people ask me, so who do you work with? What do you do in Atlanta? And, of course, I never share confidential information, but, of course, it's a public webinar at this stage of the game. I've always referred to you folks here, if you will, as the goose that lays the golden egg, very, very openly. And I was actually on Twitter last evening, and one of the quotes just hit it out of the park for me in hearing kind of you folks talk here. Attention is the most basic form of love, and I don't think that's wrong. I think that is really the most basic form of love, and a little bit of attention to the goose goes a long ways, especially if she's laying golden eggs. So should we move to the Q&A? Yep. Yeah, sure. Excellent. Jake, you with us?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. That was incredible, and a great way to end it too with that nice quote. We don't have a lot of time left, so let's move right into some Q&A if that's okay with everyone. First question that I see here, coming from the GoToWebinar, someone named Marco asked, can Agile methodologies be used in bigger teams? It's actually a good question. Usually it's more for smaller teams. Is there a team size limit? Just in case this helps, they're a company with about 250 employees.
In general, I don't think there is a limit to it. I mean, we're up to 24, and we have a daily stand-up. It's not that large, but I can definitely see it expanding. Again, as I always said, this is always a challenge there, but it's pretty easy to overcome because it's a very flexible process.
Very well said. And definitely from a coaching perspective, it's a fractal, if you will. Start at one micro scale and increase to multiple scales. This particular client is one particular size, exactly as Jeremy's saying. We've definitely worked with other clients where it's scaled, and actually we're involved in engagements that are worldwide, if you will.
Something tells me our example of using swarms, while we may only have 24 or so people, even in that realm, there's 4 or at least 4 different areas of distinct product development, and swarms focusing on those. And I would imagine that a size team of 250 was probably had some logical division like that as well.
Exactly.
Okay, great answer. Thanks for that. We probably have time for one more question. Just want to mention very quickly to anyone who had asked a question that we won't have time to answer, we're going to be doing a blog post with all the answers to these questions. So check the planbox.com blog within the next week, let's say, for answers to those questions. Just want to mention that quickly. Next question, probably last question. How can the use of project management tools or issue tracking tools help in an agile transformation journey?
So this is Sai just kind of chiming in, if you will. Really, any tool that a team is using or not using is a relationship with that tool. If the relationship is healthy, it could add value. If the relationship is less than healthy, meaning there's a dependency, and I've turned off my thinking, and I'm just submitting, whether we call them tickets or Excel line items or whatever it may be, if I'm submitting them and not thinking and having that tool overwhelm the human element, then it creates a dysfunction within an organization. That would be a very general thought, but anything from the team likewise.
In general, you just can't let the tool influence the team and how we need to work. So we have to find a way to use the tool a different way if we're finding it's not improving communication or adding value, and really focusing on the value and just making sure it works for the product and for what the business wants.
Or even look into the possibility of replacing the tool, finding something else that will work.
Sure.
Very good point. And forgive me, Mark, please go on.
In our case, like you had mentioned, our elimination of defects from the very beginning was critical. The energy saved in not having to manage all of those defects and instead creating the collaboration and conversation between team members, the ownership, where the developer was directly and immediately responsible to make sure that what he was developing was satisfying the product owner and not dealing with all the overhead required of the defect management, I think was hugely positive for us.
Yeah, very good point. Jump in.
And make sure whatever tools you decide to use facilitate the process, not drive the process.
Well said.
One additional thought, Jake, is we actually got to a point where, as we were going through discovery, where we encountered enough dysfunction, with all due respect to all parties, and Harish, I love you, but enough dysfunction that I actually proposed. I said, if we can't alleviate the dysfunction, then we will essentially get rid of all potential tooling and start afresh. And that definitely was a conversation. So it's doing the right things within the right situation.
It's situational, exactly. Well said. And yeah, you don't want to forget about the human element for sure. Okay, well, I think that's pretty much all the time we have. Again, I just want to thank Sai and the team. Really, that was just an incredible webinar. So much good content in there. And yeah, feel free to reach out to anyone at Planbox or Sai with any questions or comments. And again, thank you guys for all attending.